Imagine you're standing before a wall of stone, nearly hidden by thick, choking vines. The jungle around you doesn't breathe. Even the birds are silent here. The air is hot, unmoving, like something is holding its breath beneath the soil. In front of you is a sealed doorway, older than any ruin you've seen. Carved into the stone are symbols, not quite hieroglyphs, not quite letters. They seem to pulse in the shadows. There's no name, no plaque, no explanation. Just a whispered title passed down by locals for generations. The room where she waits. They say no one who's entered has returned. They say her body never decayed. They say her eyes are still open. But the most disturbing thing isn't what they believe. It's why she was placed there. Because this isn't a tale of an unlucky queen, murdered and buried in shame. No. This is the story of a woman who was loved so obsessively, so absolutely, that her people refused to let her go, even after she begged them to. She wasn't embalmed after death. She was embalmed while still alive, conscious, aware, breathing. Her name was Amasara, the sun-daughter of the kingdom of Davyd, a girl born under a black sky, crowned before her bones were fully grown, and condemned to stillness before her heart stopped beating. They worshipped her. They built temples in her image. They sang to her, bowed to her, lit candles for her. And when the time came, they offered her the greatest honor their gods demanded: eternal preservation. But Amasara wasn't ready to die. And even now, thousands of years later, some say, she never truly did. The kingdom of Davyd has long been lost to time. There are no coins, no records in modern museums, no country that claims its legacy. Its history exists only in fragments, oral stories passed down from the outer tribes of Central Africa, and in half-erased scrolls buried deep in old European archives. Scholars have debated its existence for over a century, calling it myth, calling it metaphor. But then came the expedition. In 1971, a British researcher named Julian Crest disappeared in the Congo Basin, just days after sending his last report. His final transmission mentioned a strange structure, one that did not match any known culture and seemed to have been built to seal something in rather than keep anything out. What's strange is what he wrote next. She's still beautiful. Her skin looks as if it were kissed by the sun just yesterday. And her eyes, they are not the eyes of a corpse. The letter was never published, but a photocopy made its way to a quiet shelf at Cambridge, buried among research on African megastructures. It remained unread until 2009. And what followed was silence. This story is not about proving whether Davyd truly existed. It's about understanding the cost of being seen as a god. It's about a girl whose life was rewritten by ritual, whose death was never allowed to arrive, and whose name was carved into stone not to honor her, but to trap her forever in time. What you're about to hear is not a fairy tale. It's a mirror, a warning, and maybe the reason some doors should never be opened.
She was born on a night when the stars disappeared. The priests called it a sign. The sky has gone blind, they whispered, so that she may see for all of us. Her mother died during labor. Her father, no one ever named him. In Davyd, gods didn't need fathers. They named her Amasara, which meant she who warms without burning. A girl child, wrapped in linen, silent, unblinking. The midwives swore she didn't cry once, just stared, eyes wide, amber like fire trapped in honey. From her first breath, she was not a child. She was a prophecy. By the time she was 4, she walked the palace halls barefoot, trailed by attendants too afraid to speak in her presence. When she touched the sacred stones at the temple gates, the high priest reportedly wept. "She remembers," he said. "She carries memory in her bones." At 6, Amasara was placed on a throne, not as ruler, but as a vessel. She wore gold cuffs on her wrists and ankles, her skin brushed with ash and myrrh. She was taught not to blink in public, not to speak unless asked. Her face had to remain unreadable, like the sun itself, beautiful, unreachable, blinding. Children in Gareb were told, "Behave, or Amasara will see your lies." She became a myth while still learning to write her name. But she did learn. She learned everything. By 10, she spoke 3 dialects. By 12, she gave orders. And by 14, she passed her first sentence of death, a traitor who had tried to poison the sacred cisterns. Her voice did not shake. But the moment the sentence was carried out, she retreated to the southern shrine and stayed there for 3 days, alone, refusing food, refusing light. Witnesses say she walked out pale, but calm. She said nothing, and no one dared ask. Worship of Amasara had grown beyond tradition. She was no longer just sun-daughter. She was Kalani, the embodied light. Merchants carved her face into coins. Farmers buried tokens of her image in the soil before planting, believing her gaze would coax the seeds to grow. Even warriors wore talismans bearing her name over their hearts. She was seen not as ruler, but as protector, not as queen, but as immortal flame. And yet, she never smiled in public. Some thought it was power. Others feared it was pain. One story, passed down among Gared's temple servants, told of a night when Amasara fled her own coronation ritual. She'd just turned 16, the age when monarchs were traditionally anointed with nimbu oil and declared divine. They found her not in the palace, but outside the city walls, barefoot in the river, whispering something in a language no one recognized. When the guards approached, she didn't run. She simply turned and said, "Do not make me their god. I only wanted to be a daughter." The priests dismissed it as metaphor. They added it to the scriptures. But something had shifted. From that year forward, Amasara began writing letters. Strange, secret writings kept hidden in scroll tubes sealed with wax. Only her handmaidens saw them, and she never spoke of what they contained. Some believed they were prayers, others warnings. The truth? We may never know. But we know this. At 19, the High Council of Gared declared it was time. The stars had aligned again, just as they did on the night of her birth. And this time, they said, the sky was not blind. It was waiting.
The day of the rite began with silence. Not ceremonial chanting, not the thunder of drums. Just silence. Vast, unnatural, enforced. At sunrise, the palace gates were sealed. No birdsong,
No footsteps, no speech. Even the fountains had been turned off. The air in Narrated was still, as if the kingdom itself was holding its breath. Inside the temple of the horizon, where no man had walked barefoot in centuries, a chamber had been prepared. Polished obsidian floors, fragrant oils in clay bowls, a single altar made of carved bone and gold. It was not a place of mourning. It was a womb, they said, a sacred vessel where gods returned to sleep. Amasara stood alone in her private chamber, eyes fixed on the horizon through a lattice window. Her skin had been scrubbed raw with salt and desert ash. Her hair, once braided with strands of sunlight-colored silk, had been cut to the scalp. Her body anointed with Kirin sap, which slowed the heartbeat, a sacred sedative used only once in a ruler's life. When the priestesses entered, she did not turn. She spoke only one sentence. "Do not pretend this is for the gods. This is for you." They said nothing. The Yellovan rite was the highest honor in Narrated. To be embalmed alive was to bridge both worlds, to become a permanent guardian between the living and the ancestors. A living relic, a sacred vessel, a symbol of unbroken lineage. But for Amasara, it was a sentence. She had begged the council to delay it. She argued it wasn't time, that the omens had been misread, that the gods were not hungry for her yet. But they didn't listen, because divinity was not hers to control, it was theirs to wield. The ritual began with binding. Thin silk cords soaked in sacred resin were wound around her wrists and ankles, not to restrain, but to weigh down the spirit. Her pulse slowed further as attendants pressed cold stones against her chest, her temples, her throat, not to hurt, not to kill, just to make her still. She was dressed in linen robes layered 7 times, each layer painted with symbols of light and silence. Amasara's lips were painted black with soot and crushed orchid, the color of eternal dusk. Her eyes lined in gold to reflect the divine. Her heartbeat, faint, sluggish, could barely be felt. And then came the prayers. Dozens of robed figures surrounded her, chanting in tones so low they barely vibrated the air. The temple filled with incense. She could barely see. Her breath was shallow. Her legs shook, but she did not fall. She did not speak. She did not weep. But inside her, something was screaming. Her mind clawed against the ritual's rhythm, trying to stay awake, trying to resist the pull of sedation. She focused on the feel of her tongue in her mouth, the ache in her feet, anything to remain tethered, because she knew what came next, the ceiling. And yet, she did not flee. Even then, Amasara chose to walk toward the chamber herself. It was tradition that the chosen one offer their body willingly. It had to be a gift, not a sacrifice. If they resisted, the ritual would lose power. That was the story they told. But Amasara's compliance was not consent. It was defiance. Each step she took into that black stone tomb was a message: "You may take my body, but I will never become what you want." As she lay on the polished quartz slab, her arms crossed, her head turned toward the rising sun, she whispered a sentence that no one recorded, but one the handmaiden claimed to have heard. "Let them see me forever, and remember this was done in love, not mercy." The doors closed. The chanting stopped, and the Queen of Garrod disappeared into legend. The chamber was built with no doors. Only a stone slab slid into place by 12 men using ropes and levers. Once closed, it became airtight, lightless, soundless, perfectly still. Inside, Amasara lay upon a platform carved from fossilized bone, her body wrapped in linen and prayer. The walls around her were covered in resin to preserve air. Clay pots filled with herbs and sacred salts lined the corners. Beneath her, a basin of hot coals releasing fumes of myrrh, pine, and Chiron ash. Not to kill, to transform. Because this was not a burial, it was a becoming. The first hour, Amasara's heartbeat slowed further, her breath faint, shallow, like wind between reeds. Her muscles twitched under the wrappings, reacting to heat, pressure, fear. But she didn't move. The second hour, her fingers curled reflexively. Her lips trembled beneath the painted black. Her body began to sweat beneath the linen, and the herbs inside the room began to absorb it, a living embalming. The priests called this the purging. It was said the soul must first abandon all warmth before it could be preserved. The third hour. Her eyes fluttered, not closed, never fully closed, just heavy. Her body was shutting down not from death, but from surrender. She was still aware, still hearing, still inside herself. That was the cruelty. They hadn't killed her. They had trapped her. The tradition of live mummification was known only to a few ancient cultures. Most scholars dismissed it as legend, impossible, impractical, too horrific to be real. But the ritual of Garrod was different. The priests didn't believe in death. They believed in containment. Amasara's body was treated as sacred architecture, something to preserve, maintain, worship. As the heat in the chamber rose, her skin began to dry. The oils on her flesh thickened, forming a barrier. Her blood vessels contracted. Her heartbeat slowed to a near stop. But still, the eyes remained open. No one spoke of what happened after the door closed, but stories emerged. Temple workers claimed that for days after the sealing, faint sounds came from within, like soft movement, breathing, even weeping. One guard swore he heard nails scratching the inside of the slab. Another claimed to see faint shadows behind the cracks at sunset. The priests dismissed it all. They said residual energy, the echoes of divinity settling. But the high priest's robe was found torn one morning, his body untouched, but his eyes wide with terror. He never spoke again. Years passed, then decades. The kingdom of Garrod began to fade. War, famine, the jungle reclaiming stone, and through it all, the chamber remained sealed. Not a single crack in the wall, not a single breath of rot, just stillness. And the name of Amasara spoken only in hushed warnings. Parents said it to frighten children. Priests whispered it to remind rulers. Even gods can be imprisoned. And always the legend ended the same way. Her eyes never closed.
The fall of Garrod didn't come in a single night. It came slowly, like rot beneath painted walls. First, the droughts. Then the harvest failed. Then the people began to forget why they worshipped a girl who never spoke, never aged, never died. Temples were looted, statues toppled. The jungle crept in like a patient curse. And somewhere in the heart of that dying kingdom,
Beneath vines and dust, the sealed tomb remained untouched, covered by earth, swallowed by time. But the whispers never stopped. In 1971, a British expedition set out to find the remains of an unnamed lost city in the Congo basin. Officially, it was a geological mission. Unofficially, it was led by a man obsessed with the legend of Amasara. His name was Dr. Julian Crest, an Oxford-trained anthropologist known for chasing myths with the rigor of science. He had read the archived scrolls, seen the forbidden sketches in a Belgian collector's vault, and followed local tales to a place that didn't exist on any map. The locals refused to guide him. They told him he was digging into the mouth of something that still breathed. But Crest was undeterred. He hired porters. He brought instruments. He found it. The structure was almost entirely underground, buried beneath layers of stone and root. What remained visible was a black arch, unnatural in color, smooth as glass. Crest's journal described it as not built, but grown. They dug for 3 days. On the 4th, they found the seal. It took 12 hours to unearth the entire doorway. There were glyphs, unlike anything in recorded history, but one symbol repeated over and over. Dead. A stylized eye, open and staring. The porters refused to go further. Crest, now alone, left one final note in his journal. The air here tastes like memory. She's waiting. No one knows exactly what happened next. The expedition was marked as lost. Only fragments of Crest's journal were recovered, found years later in a rusted trunk sold at an estate auction. But one page stands out, burned at the edges, written with a shaking hand. She moved, not like a living thing, like a dream that didn't want to end. Her eyes were not bones, they were wet, and when I stepped closer, I heard my own name from behind my teeth. The chamber was never reopened. Satellite scans of the region reveal anomalies, shifts in magnetic fields, unexplainable heat signatures beneath the soil. But no expedition since has located the tomb. Maybe the jungle took it back. Maybe it moved. Or maybe it never truly opened. Because, you see, that's the secret no one wants to admit. The room was never empty. She was never dead. Just waiting. Not for rescue, not for revenge. Just for someone, anyone, to remember that she never chose to be worshipped. She only wanted to be free. And if you ever find yourself deep in the jungle, where the birds no longer sing, and the air feels too still, listen. They say, if you're quiet enough, you can still hear her breathing. And if you're brave enough to look, you'll find her eyes still open.